Today we're going to focus on the slope of parallel and perpendicular lines. Now, parallel lines are two lines, remember, that never cross. And so the slope of two lines that are parallel are the same. So if they have the same slope, they're never going to cross and they're going to be parallel lines. Any two vertical lines or horizontal lines are going to be parallel as well. If they're two vertical, that means they both have an undefined slope, so the slopes are the same. And if they're horizontal, the slopes are going to be 0, and so they're also going to have the same slope. So it kind of fits in with that statement that we have up here. So the first thing that we can do is we can check to see if lines are parallel. I look at these and, well, they kind of look parallel. But we have to be sure. We have to actually be sure. So the way that we do that is we find the slope of each line. So you'll see L1, or line 1, and then we have L2, or line 2. And so we're going to find the slope of each of these. We have points that we can do that with. And what I'm going to go ahead and do and label this one x1, y1, and x2, y2, just like we always do. And then we're going to find the slope of this line. So we have negative 4, minus 5 over 2 minus negative 1. Negative 4 minus 5 is going to be a negative 9 over 2 minus negative 1. Remember, that becomes a plus 3. And I can simplify negative 9 over 3 is to a negative 3. So the slope of this line right here is a negative 3. So now we need to find the slope of this other line. So again, I'm going to label my points x1, y1, x2, y2, and find the slope. So we have negative 4 minus 3 over negative 1 minus a negative 3. Negative 4 minus 3 is a negative 7. Negative 1 minus a negative 3, so that means the plus is going to be a 2. Negative 7 divided by 2 is a negative 3.5. And even though we notice that these slopes are not the same, so that means these lines are not parallel. Even though they kind of look like it in here, if I look really close, you can kind of see they're farther apart down here than they are up here. So these lines are not parallel because the slopes are not the same. In order for just the slopes to be the same, or in order for them to be parallel, these slopes would have to be exactly the same. So now we can write an equation in for parallel lines if we know one of the equations. So what is the equation of the line parallel to y equals negative 3x minus 5? And it contains this point, negative 1, 8. The first thing that we need to know is we need to know our slope, or our m. And I look at this equation, and we can find the slope of this just by looking at the equation, because this is in slope-intercept form. That means our slope is the value connected to the x, so it's a negative 3. Then we have a point of negative 1, 8. So we can go ahead and write our equation in point slope form. Remember, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Well, this is our x1 and our y1, and we can write our equation. Y minus y1, which is 8, equals our slope of negative 3 times x minus our x1, but this is a negative 1 here, so we write it as plus 1. And there is our equation. We can just leave it in point slope form. So now let's look at perpendicular lines. Now, a perpendicular line is a line that intersects another line at a 90-degree angle. So that's 90 degrees. So these two lines are perpendicular. So two lines are perpendicular if the slopes are the opposite reciprocal. This means the product of those slopes is going to equal -1. The opposite means that one's positive and one's negative, and the reciprocal means that they are the flipped fraction. And then again, this is one is positive and one's negative. So with this, any vertical line and any horizontal line are perpendicular. So if you have a vertical line and a horizontal line, they are going to be perpendicular. So we can check to see if slopes are perpendicular, and they have to be the opposite reciprocal. So one has to be positive, one has to be negative, and then they have to be the flipped fractions. What happens with that is when you multiply them, your slope's always going to equal -1. So we can check that. We'll find these slopes, and then we'll multiply them, and if we get -1, they're perpendicular. So we have line 1 and line 2 again. Line 1 and line 2. Line 1 is right here. We're going to label x1, y1, x2, y2. y2 is -4 minus y1, which is 2. x2 is 0 minus x1, which is a -4. -4 minus 2 is a -6 over 0 minus a -1. Remember, that becomes a plus. 0 plus 4 is 4. I can actually simplify that by dividing both sides by 2, the top and the bottom by 2, and we get a -3 over 2. And we can leave that as a fraction. For line 2, x1, y1, x2, y2. So y2 is -3 minus x1, which is 3, over -5 minus y or x1, which is 4. -3 minus 3 is going to be a -6. -5 minus 4 is a -9. I can actually divide both of these by -3. The negatives get rid of that negative, so it becomes a 2 over 3. So here's our slopes. Now they're definitely not parallel because they're not the same, but now we check for the opposite reciprocal. So this one's negative, this one's positive, so there's the opposite part, and the reciprocal means that the fraction's flipped. So the top is a 3 here, and the bottom's a 2 here, so the other fraction should be flipped. Here's a 2, and there's a 3. So you can kind of see that these are perpendicular, because they are the opposite and they're the flipped fraction. We can also check it by multiplying. Remember I said we can multiply the 2 and we should get -1. -3 times 2 is -6. 2 times 3 is a +6. -6 over +6 does equal -1. So it checks out. Those are perpendicular. And then the last thing on this one is we can write our equation of a perpendicular line. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to find our slope again. Now the slope of this line is 1/5 x. So I have to find, or 1/5, sorry. So I have to find the opposite reciprocal. So we would flip this. So the 5 would be on top and the 1 would be on the bottom, or that's just a 5, and then this one's positive, so it'd have to be negative. So our slope's going to be -1. And our point is the 15, 4. And so we're going to use our point slope form again. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And plug in those values. So y minus y1, which is 4, equals our slope of -5 times x minus our x1, or our x value, which is 15. And there is our equation.